Hi, guys. It's me, Latoya Moore, one of the co hosts of Becoming Eva. And after talking to one of my friends about my birth story and my journey during this last pregnancy, she suggested that I make a YouTube video about my journey and my supernatural childbirth. So first, I'll start off by talking about this book. Um, it's an old book. It's called Supernatural Childbirth, and I don't know if you guys have heard of this book. It's by Jackie Mize, and I read this book from cover to cover throughout my entire pregnancy. There are prayers and confessions that you're supposed to pray during your pray over your body and over your baby during your pregnancy. And I did that throughout this pregnancy. And much of the book, the premise of the book is basically having childbirth, a supernatural childbirth without pain during delivery, during labor and delivery. Now, I'm going to offer a slightly different perspective than how supernatural childbirth is presented in this book. For me, childbirth throughout this pregnancy, it was a journey, and I was able to see the glory of God manifested in different ways throughout my pregnancy and throughout the childbirth experience. Now, I won't quite say that I didn't have any pain whatsoever, because it could be painful to get get the IV stuck into your wrist or in your hand. That can be a source of pain. Like, there's different sources of pain that you can possibly experience through the childbirth experience. So I wouldn't necessarily say that I had absolutely no pain throughout my childbirth experience, but I will say that I was able to see the glory of God manifested in different moments throughout my pregnancy and throughout the childbirth experience. So that's what I want to share with the Becoming Eva community, and to anyone who wants to hear my story of this pregnancy. So first, I'll start off by telling you guys about how my baby was breeched at 38 weeks and how I got him to turn on his own. So at 36 weeks, my son was transverse, which just means he was like horizontal in my uterus. And he was transverse throughout much of my pregnancy when they started tracking his position. And because of my age, I was considered high risk. So I saw high risk doctors throughout this pregnancy. So they were closely monitoring him throughout the pregnancy. And so they told me at 37 weeks, if he was not head down, then we would have to look at some different options and go over like a birth plan. And so at 37 weeks, after praying throughout, week 36, he was head down at 37 weeks. And then the very next week, even through prayer again, the very next week, he was in a breech position. So at 38 weeks, he was breech, and my doctor gave me options. She said, well, typically, we don't do external cephalic versions past 38 weeks. So if you want to go ahead and get that procedure done, we would need to do it like tomorrow. So you need to come in, check into the hospital. You'll probably most likely need an epidural to do the external cephalic version. And we would spin him. And so she gave me like the pros and cons and risks associated with the external cephalic version. She said like his heart rate could drop and you may need an emergency C-section. Even if we get him to turn head down, he might turn back breech by next week. So it's a 50-50 chance. So she's like, talk it over with your husband and then let me know what you want to do. And so I talked it over with my husband and we went over the pros and cons. And I decided to just, number one, pray about it. We decided to pray, and then we decided to do some of the techniques that we found on YouTube. And I don't want to steal the credit from this person, but we watched a YouTube video by this lady named Truly Yannalee. And she went over some techniques to get your baby to try to turn naturally. And so we did those techniques, and I won't like show you how to do it, but you can go check out her YouTube video. She has, pictures and illustrations on how to do those exercises. So the first exercise that I did was called the forward leaning inversion. And I had to do that for 30 seconds, 4 times each. And Ryan, my husband, he was helping me out so that I wouldn't like topple over. So make sure you have somebody help you out if you decide to do any of the exercises that she suggests. And then I also did the glute bridge. I did those 10 times each with 4 repetitions. And then she also suggested using a frozen pack of fruit or vegetables and putting it on top of your belly, kind of above your belly button, to try to motivate the baby to move away from the cold temperature. And we also played music near the bottom of my belly on our cell phones. My husband, he talked to the baby near the bottom of my belly. We also used a flashlight. We started shining the flashlight near the top of my belly button where his head was, and then we moved it in a circular fashion towards the bottom of my belly where we wanted him to move. Now, I will say for me, I noticed that he was head down 3 days later. Now, I had a scheduled induction for week 39 because my son was not thriving. He was not growing at the rate that he should have been growing, and they couldn't determine why he was not growing at the rate that he should have been growing. So they advised me to have a scheduled induction so that we could get him out because there was obviously something going on and they couldn't figure out what was wrong. The placenta looked good, the umbilical cord looked good, the fluid looked good. They just didn't know why he wasn't growing. So induction day. So induction day came, and I was, of course, 39 weeks and a couple of days. And my doctor, she didn't sound, or she didn't seem like she had too much faith in him being able to turn on his own. In fact, she said, well, typically at 38 weeks, they're in the position that they're going to be in for birth. And it's highly unlikely that he's going to flip in the correct position. So, with my faith, praying, and I was reciting scriptures and prayers from the Supernatural Childbirth book and doing those exercises because faith without works is dead. I believe that he had turned on his own through prayer and through those exercises that we were doing. So I had to arrive at the hospital at 7 a.m. for paperwork and COVID testing and all that stuff, getting the IV stuck in my hand. And at 9 a.m., my doctor came in. She came in with jokes. She was like, well, let's just see if doing all that standing on your head worked to get the baby to turn. So she had jokes when she came into the room, and she did the ultrasound, and he was head down. Praise the Lord. I was so excited that my son had turned head down. I believed he was head down, and it was more like I was just waiting on her confirmation that he was head down. And we were so excited that I did not have to have a C-section, and she offered to try to do the external cephalic version that day to try to spin him if he was still breached. But we didn't have to do that. So we just did the Pitocin. Now, if you've ever had Pitocin, if you've had to ever get induced, it's like the worst when it comes to contractions. The contractions come very fast, and it's like very unnatural, and it's more painful to me than just naturally having contractions. So I knew I was going to need that epidural. Now, I'll tell you, the epidural does not really work for me, my body. The first time I had it, it wore off very quickly. I had to push my first child out for 4 hours long. She was in a sunny side position, so she was in the wrong position of birth. And so they told me I was going to have to push a long time. I didn't realize it was going to be 4 hours. So I pushed her for 4 hours. During that time, the epidural had wore off. I felt everything. It was very, very painful for the first one. So I knew the epidural did not really work on my body that well. Even with my second birth, I opted to have the epidural. And as soon as he left out of the room after putting the epidural in my body, and I laid back, I felt a lot of pressure near my bottom, and they said it was I was fully dilated and it was time to push. So after I pushed her out, it only took maybe like 6 minutes to push out my second daughter. Then the epidural just kind of wore off very quickly, and I was able to walk to the bathroom without any assistance as soon as I was in the recovery room. So it doesn't really work that well for me. So with this delivery, with Pitocin, and I've had Pitocin before, when I had to get induced when one of my daughters did not have any fluid. And so it was an unscheduled induction, and the Pitocin was pretty rough. And I knew that I was going to need an epidural with this scheduled induction. So they started the Pitocin, and it was going fine. They checked my cervix. At the beginning, I was only 1 centimeter dilated. And then after a couple of hours, the nurse came in to try to check my cervix. And my cervix is extremely high and very hard to reach. So when the nurse was checking my cervix, I was screaming at her because it hurt so bad. It was burning, and it was a lot of pain. So at this time, I did not have an epidural just yet, but the nurse, she quickly took her hand out, and she said she wanted to stop torturing me, and she advised that I get the epidural sooner rather than later, because they're going to have to check. She said, we're going to have to check your cervix, and I don't want to torture you. So you're going to have to let me check your cervix, and I advise you to get the epidural because, this was obviously a lot of pain for you. And so I said, okay. But just keep in mind, the epidural wears off. It wears off really, really fast. So if you could talk to the anesthesiologist to see what can be done when it's closer to time, to actually push. And so she talked to the anesthesiologist, and he said, he could give me a second dose after I thought it was wearing off. And so I opted to do that. So I got the epidural, and I could still feel the contractions with the epidural because, again, like I said, it doesn't really work that well on me. So I could still feel the contractions. And, they said, well, as long as it's not that bad, at least it's taken away some of the intensity, which it did. It really did. It helped take some of the intensity of the contractions down a few levels, because if you've ever had Pitocin, the intensity is pretty high with those contractions on Pitocin. So the epidural helped with that, even though I could still feel the contractions. And then eventually my baby's heart rate slowed down with the Pitocin. So they had to slow the Pitocin down because my son's heart rate had slowed down. And so around 5:30, I believe it was 5:30, I started playing my praise and worship music in the delivery room because things were moving really, really slow. And, I just wanted to praise and worship God while we were waiting. And so the doctor came in at 6 p.m. and she checked me, and I was only 6 centimeters dilated. And she said, well, you've been on the Pitocin since 9 o'clock this morning, and you're only 6 centimeters dilated, and really the baby should have been here by now. So I want to know, since you did those old wives' tales to get your baby to turn head down, if you wanted to try this unconventional method called shaking the apples. And I said, well, yeah. If that's going to help get him to come through the birth, move his head through the birth canal, then I would love to try something because this is taking a long time. And so I said, after she explained what shaking the apples were, I said, well, how am I going to do that if I've had the epidural? I mean, I'm still slightly numb. I can still move, because it's kind of worn off. And she said, we'll help you get on all fours, and we're going to wrap this sheet around you. And with your contractions, we're going to move your hips from side to side with this sheet. And so I said, okay. So she explained to me shaking the apple. She brought in a couple other nurses to assist with helping me get on all fours. And with the first contraction, they shook my hips from side to side, and I could feel his head coming down. And I said, Doc, I feel his head. He's coming. And she said, well, that was quick. I mean, you were just 6 centimeters when we just checked you. Let's try to shake your apples with 2 more contractions. And so they shook my hips from side to side with 2 more contractions, and then they flipped me over. And I was like, I think he's coming out. I could feel those contractions very strongly now. If anyone's had a child, you should know, like, when you're fully dilated, how those contractions feel. So I was feeling those type of contractions at that point, and I said, he's coming. It's time to push. And so she checked me, and she was like, oh, you are fully dilated. You are about to push. So they put my legs in the little stirrups, and she said, okay, you're getting ready to push. And so I pushed 3 times and he was out in 2 minutes. So he was out by 6:18. So mind you, they came in at 6 p.m. Talking about, oh, you're not progressing fast enough. We got to get him. We got to figure out how to get him to get his head down or get his head through. And so the time that it took for us to talk, get me in the position for shaking the apples, flip me back over and push, he was out within 18 at the time span of 18 minutes. I only pushed for 2 minutes, 3 good pushes, and he was out. It was the fastest I've ever pushed a child out. I thought it was pretty amazing. And then I was just thinking back to we had the praise and worship music still going on at that time. So I was just thinking back and analyzing the ways in which God was present throughout the delivery, because for me, the most painful part was when the nurse was checking my cervix. Like, the rest of it was not really that painful. And once I pushed him out, I had a huge smile on my face and I was like, oh my gosh, she's already out. And the nurses were kind of in awe and they were like, oh my gosh, that worked so fast. I can't believe you only pushed for 2 minutes. He's already out. Like, the shaking the apples thing, they were, in awe that worked so quickly too. And just everything that day, the nurses and the doctor, all of them seem genuinely surprised that how everything worked. And so I'm thankful that to me, this was a supernatural childbirth. It was not a lot of pain. I only had 1 stitch. She only had to stitch me up with 1 stitch. So I didn't really tear that much. He came out quickly. It was a lot of joy. I didn't cry. I said to the doctor, I didn't even have a chance to cry. And she's like, well, you can still cry if you want to. I was just excited, and it was a lot of peace and a lot of joy in the delivery room. And I was just super excited that God had showed up. Like, he helped turn him head down. I did not have to get a C-section. I did not have to do the external cephalic version. And my son came out fast. So hopefully this offers a different perspective on supernatural childbirth. Even though it was not like completely painless, I think it was the least amount of pain as possible for me, because it was painful to get the IV stuck into my hand, and it was painful for them to check my cervix, but ultimately everything else was not really a lot of pain. And so I'm thankful for the experience, and hopefully this can be a testimony and give a testimony to someone and give you encouragement if your baby is breech, or if you need some encouragement on your labor and delivery. Thanks for listening.